Good evening, dear friends. I hope you found yourself in a comfortable spot tonight, perhaps nestled under your favorite blanket, with the day's worries gently fading away. Dim those lights, let your breathing slow, and settle in as we embark on a peaceful journey together through the quiet corridors of history. Before we begin this soothing exploration, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Where are you listening from tonight? What's your favorite way to unwind after a long day? If this content helps you relax and drift towards sleep, please consider subscribing to join our peaceful community of evening wanderers. A gentle like would mean the world to me, and if you have suggestions for future stories to explore in the calm hours of night, please share them in the comments. Tonight, we're going to travel softly through time, visiting distant lands and forgotten moments. We'll walk quietly through the elegant, disciplined world of feudal Japan, where cherry blossoms fell like whispered secrets, and honor was measured in the depth of one's bow. We'll sail alongside ancient navigators who read the stars like poetry, and we'll witness moments when the course of history turned on the quiet decisions made in candlelit rooms. Let your mind wander as we begin. There's no need to focus intently on every word. Simply let the gentle rhythm of the story wash over you like waves against a distant shore. Some nights, sleep comes quickly. Other nights, we need a longer journey to find our rest. Either way, I'll be here with you, sharing these peaceful tales until your eyes grow heavy and your thoughts drift away. So close your eyes if you'd like, or let them rest softly on the ceiling. Take a deep breath in and let it out slowly. Another breath, feeling your shoulders relax, your muscles softening. We have all the time in the world tonight. There's nowhere else to be, nothing else to do. Just you, me, and these gentle stories from long ago. Tonight, we begin in a land where time moved differently, where each day unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance between duty and beauty, between the harsh realities of survival and the delicate art of living with grace. We begin in feudal Japan, in an era when morning mist clung to temple gardens and the sound of distant temple bells marked the gentle passage of hours. Imagine, if you will, awakening in feudal Japan as the first pale light of dawn touches the paper screens of your dwelling. The world is hushed, painted in soft grays and gentle blues, with wisps of mist drifting through bamboo groves like the breath of sleeping spirits. This is a land where your place in life was determined not by dreams or ambitions, but by the quiet accident of birth, as fixed and certain as the rising sun. In this distant world, there were no choices to make about who you would become. Your path was already written in the careful brushstrokes of family lineage, stretching back through generations like an unbroken chain. Were you born into a samurai family? Then your life would be dedicated to the way of the warrior, to honor as sharp as the blade you carried, and to a code of conduct so precise that even your breathing had to match the rhythm of respect. If you entered this world as a peasant child, your hands would know the texture of soil and rice before they learned to hold anything else. Your back would bend toward the earth, and your calendar would be written by the seasons: planting, tending, harvesting, surviving. The mud would become familiar as an old friend, and the sunrise would call you to work as reliably as any bell. Perhaps you were born to artisans, your fingers destined to shape clay or weave silk, creating beauty while remaining invisible yourself. Or maybe fate placed you among the merchants, forever caught between necessity and social disapproval, wealthy enough to eat well, but never quite respectable enough to be truly seen. And then there were those born to the shadowy edges, the Eta, who dealt with death and leather and all the necessary tasks that polite society needed but preferred not to acknowledge. They lived like ghosts, with important work, essential but officially invisible, moving through a world that required their services while pretending they didn't exist. The beauty of this system, if you could call it beauty, was its certainty. There were no endless choices to paralyze the mind, no constant wondering if you'd chosen the right path. Your role was given to you like a carefully tailored garment, and your job was simply to wear it with grace, to bow at the proper depth, to speak in the proper tone, to move through your days without disrupting the delicate harmony that held everything together. In this world of predetermined paths, even the simple act of washing your face became a ritual steeped in meaning, a daily ceremony that connected you to ancestors and expectations alike. The morning cleansing wasn't just about removing the dust of yesterday. It was about preparing yourself to face the watchful eyes of society, where cleanliness was considered a reflection of your spiritual state. Picture yourself rising with the dawn, when the air still holds the coolness of night, and the world feels fresh and full of possibility. But there's no warm, inviting bathroom waiting for you, no heated towels or scented soaps. Instead, you make your way to a stone basin filled with water, so cold it seems to hold the memory of winter mountains, drawn from a well or stream where it has absorbed the chill of earth and sky. The water shocks your skin awake, each splash a small reminder that comfort is not the goal here, purification is. You scrub with ash or rice bran if you're fortunate, substances that smell of earth and simplicity rather than the perfumed luxury we might imagine. Every drop of water, every motion of your hands is deliberate, purposeful, preparing you not just for the day, but for the careful scrutiny of everyone you'll encounter. If you're near one of the communal bathhouses, you might join your neighbors in the ancient ritual of shared cleansing. Picture the gentle steam rising from heated water, the quiet conversations conducted in hushed tones, the careful etiquette of scrubbing yourself thoroughly before entering the communal bath. Here, in this wooden sanctuary, social barriers might soften slightly in the democracy of nakedness, but never disappear entirely. The samurai, always conscious of potential inspection by their lords, approach cleansing with military precision. Every fingernail must be perfect, every hair in place, every fold of clothing arranged just so. For them, a wrinkled robe isn't just untidy, it's a form of disrespect that could have consequences far beyond embarrassment. Women, regardless of their social station, are expected to emerge from their morning rituals like carefully arranged flowers, their hair elaborate as architecture, their movements graceful as falling leaves. The time spent on appearance isn't vanity, it's duty, a way of honoring their families and maintaining the visual harmony that feudal society prized above almost everything. Even the peasants, whose hands know honest dirt and whose backs know honest labor, must find time for this daily ritual of renewal, this quiet promise to meet the day with dignity intact. Let us walk quietly now through the world of those who carried swords not as weapons, but as extensions of their very souls. The samurai lived in a realm where honor was sharper than steel and more fragile than morning frost. Their entire existence balanced on the edge of a blade, where a single misstep, a moment's carelessness, or a poorly chosen word could lead to consequences that echoed through generations. Imagine awakening each morning knowing that your every breath was governed by Bushido, the way of the warrior, a code so demanding that it made modern perfectionism seem casual by comparison. You don't simply wake up and decide what to do with your day. Your day, your life, your very being belongs to your daimyo, your lord, whose word carries the weight of natural law, and whose moods could shift your world like weather patterns. The morning begins with meditation, with the careful arrangement of your soul before the careful arrangement of your sword. You kneel in perfect posture, your breathing regulated like clockwork, while you prepare your mind for another day of walking the razor's edge between honor and disgrace. There is no room for casual thoughts, no space for personal desires that don't align with duty. Your clothing must be precise, not just clean, but arranged with the kind of attention usually reserved for religious ceremonies. Each fold of your hakama, each angle of your obi, speaks to your discipline and your respect for the traditions that shaped your ancestors. Your swords, your daisho, the paired long and short blades, must be spotless, their edges sharp enough to cut doubt itself. Training consumes your body, while etiquette governs your spirit. Swordsmanship, archery, horsemanship, these aren't hobbies or interests. They're the fundamental languages through which you communicate your worthiness to exist in this elevated sphere. But equally important is your mastery of poetry, calligraphy, and the tea ceremony, because a warrior who cannot appreciate beauty is considered incomplete, dangerous in his simplicity. The pressure never relents. At any moment, your lord might test your knowledge, your reflexes, your composure. A poorly timed laugh, a casual gesture, a response that lacks the proper level of respect. Any of these could mark you as lacking in the spiritual development expected of your class. And should you truly fail, should dishonor stain your name or your family's reputation, the path to redemption is narrow and sharp, leading to a quiet room, a ceremonial blade, and the ultimate expression of responsibility for one's actions.
Now let us descend from the elevated world of swords and honor to walk among those whose hands knew the honest weight of earth, whose backs bent not in ceremony, but in the endless labor that fed an entire civilization. The peasant's day begins not with meditation, but with mud, not with the careful arrangement of silk, but with the practical donning of rough cotton that will see rice fields and no sweat before the sun climbs very high. There is a different kind of nobility here, though it goes unrecognized and unrewarded. It's found in rising before dawn to tend the land that sustains everyone above you in the social hierarchy, in coaxing life from soil that sometimes seems determined to remain barren, in the quiet dignity of work that makes all other work possible. Picture yourself stirring in a dwelling with no doors, no windows, just openings that let in the pre-dawn chill along with whatever four-legged visitors might wander by. Your breakfast, if fortune has smiled upon your harvest, might be a bowl of rice porridge that warms your belly and gives you strength for the long day ahead. If fortune has turned her face away, it might be barley pretending to be rice, or simply the memory of yesterday's meal and the hope that tomorrow might be more generous. The rice fields stretch before you like mirrors reflecting the sky, each one requiring the kind of patient attention that city dwellers never have to contemplate. You wade into water that never quite reaches the right temperature, feeling mud squeeze between your toes as you plant, weed, and tend the green shoots that will determine whether your family eats or goes hungry in the seasons to come. Your oxen, if you're fortunate enough to have them, become your partners in this ancient dance between human ambition and natural rhythm. If one goes missing, if one falls ill, if one simply decides to wander off, your world suddenly becomes smaller and more difficult, like losing a trusted friend who happened to have 4 legs and a talent for pulling plows. The tax collectors will come regardless of whether the harvest was good or poor, regardless of whether floods washed away your work or drought cracked it into dust. They come with ledgers and expectations, and they leave with rice that you might have preferred to see in your children's bowls. But complaining is not an option. It's a luxury reserved for those higher up the mountain of social hierarchy. In this world where every grain of rice carries weight, where every morsel must be earned through honest labor, the act of eating becomes something both sacred and sobering. Let us sit quietly at the low table where feudal Japan took its nourishment, where meals were less about pleasure and more about survival. less about variety and more about gratitude for whatever the land and season had provided. If you find yourself among the peasant class, your meals follow the rhythm of scarcity and abundance, feast and fast, always at the mercy of weather patterns that care nothing for human hunger. Rice forms the foundation of almost every meal. Rice for breakfast, rice for the midday rest, rice to end the day when the sun finally releases you from your labors. When the harvest has been kind, it's actual rice, white and filling and warm in your belly. When times are lean, it might be barley or millet dressed up with hope and called rice anyway. The accompaniments are simple, honest things drawn from whatever grows nearby or can be preserved through the harsh months. Pickled radishes that crunch between your teeth like small celebrations. Vegetables that have learned to survive in soil that doesn't always cooperate. And occasionally, if the gods are smiling and fortune has visited your village, a bit of fish, dried and salted until it's more memory than meal, but precious for that very reason. Tea might grace your cup, but not the elaborate ceremony reserved for higher classes. This is working tea, practical tea, meant to warm your hands around the cup as much as to warm your throat. It speaks of utility rather than ritual, though no less worthy for its simplicity. For the samurai class, meals carry different burdens. Yes, the food might be of better quality, but it comes with elaborate rules about timing and precedence. You might wait until your lord has eaten, until his guests have been satisfied, until everyone more important than you has been served. By the time your turn arrives, the food is cooled, but you consume it with the same careful attention you bring to everything else, knowing that even your manner of eating is being observed and judged. The seasonal nature of the food creates its own calendar of anticipation and memory. Spring brings certain flavors, summer others, autumn its own gifts, and winter brings the art of making much from little, of stretching preserved foods across the cold months while dreaming of the fresh vegetables that will return with warmer weather. Every meal is eaten in relative silence, not because conversation is forbidden, but because there's something almost sacred about the act of consuming what the earth has provided, something that deserves the respect of full attention rather than casual chatter. In this world of fixed hierarchies and careful ceremonies, words carried the weight of swords and the danger of storms. Let us whisper our way through the delicate landscape of feudal Japanese conversation, where a poorly chosen phrase could end a career, dishonor a family, or worse. Here, silence was often the wisest choice, and speaking was an art form practiced by those brave or foolish enough to risk their social standing on the precise arrangement of syllables. Imagine living in a place where your opinion was not just unwelcome, but potentially deadly, where the social order depended on everyone knowing their place so thoroughly that even their thoughts stayed within appropriate boundaries. A peasant didn't correct a samurai, not even when the samurai was obviously wrong about something as simple as the weather. A merchant might know more about economics than a lord, but suggesting such knowledge would be social suicide. Even within families, the rules applied with gentle but inflexible pressure. A son waited for his father to finish speaking, no matter how long that took or how urgent the son's contribution might be. A wife supported her husband's words, even when those words wandered far from truth or wisdom. Children learned early that listening was safer than speaking, that nodding was wiser than questioning, that respect was measured in the space between your words and your thoughts. The art of apology became a complex dance of gestures and phrases, each designed to show not just regret, but complete understanding of one's place in the grand hierarchy. You didn't just say you were sorry, you bowed to the appropriate depth, selected words that demonstrated proper humility, and often accompanied your contrition with gifts that showed the sincerity of your regret. Humor presented its own minefield of potential disaster.
What might be funny to say about someone of your own station could be treasonous if directed upward. And even laughing at the wrong time could be interpreted as disrespect or sarcasm. The safest laughter was quiet, brief, and carefully timed to show appreciation for someone else's wit rather than to display your own. Even tone of voice mattered in this careful world. Too casual, and you showed disrespect. Too formal when informality was expected, and you seemed to be mocking the very protocols you pretended to honor. The space between words, the length of pauses, the direction of your gaze while speaking, all of these carried meaning in a society that had turned communication into a high-stakes performance art. Silence, therefore, became a refuge and a strategy. Better to say nothing and be thought respectful than to speak and remove all doubt about your lack of proper understanding.
Let us now dress ourselves in the careful fabrics of feudal Japan, where clothing spoke louder than words, and fashion was less about beauty than about broadcasting your precise place in society's elaborate hierarchy. Here, what you wore wasn't a choice. It was a uniform that announced your birth, your occupation, and your worth to anyone who saw you walking down a village path or kneeling in a lord's presence. Picture the samurai, draped in layers of silk that whispered of privilege and responsibility with every movement. Their robes in colors deep as secrets, midnight blues, earth browns, and occasional touches of red that hinted at both elegance and the possibility of violence, were arranged with the precision of military formations. Nothing was casual, nothing was accidental. The way their hakama fell, the angle of their haori, the placement of their family crest, each element spoke of generations of tradition and the weight of honor. Their swords, always present, weren't just weapons, but accessories that completed their identity. The daisho, the long and short blades paired like old friends, told everyone who saw them that this person held the legal right to end the life if honor demanded it. Even the way they wore these swords, the angle and position, communicated their training, their readiness, their place in the warrior hierarchy. Meanwhile, the peasants dressed in cotton and humility, their clothing practical and unadorned as their lives. Brown, gray, and beige dominated their wardrobes, not by choice, but because dyed fabric cost money that went to more pressing needs like food and shelter. Their clothes announced, "I work with my hands, I know the value of mud, and I don't have time for fashion when there's rice to plant and taxes to pay." Every patch, every mended seam told a story of making do, of stretching resources across another season, of dignity maintained despite circumstances that offered little room for vanity. Their sandals, often their only footwear, spoke of long walks to fields and markets, of ground covered on foot because horses were for those born to different destinies. The merchants occupied a strange middle ground in this fabric hierarchy. They had money to buy fine materials, but social pressure to keep their displays modest. They learned to dress well, but not too well, to show prosperity without appearing to claim status above their assigned station. It was a delicate balance, like walking a tightrope made of silk. And the women, regardless of their class, they carried the additional burden of representing their family's honor through their appearance, their movements, and the seasonal appropriateness of dress and ornament. Let us step softly now into the shadowed chambers where hearts beat quietly against the rigid framework of duty, where love existed like wildflowers growing in the careful geometry of formal gardens, beautiful when it appeared but never quite belonging to the orderly world that surrounded it. In feudal Japan, romance was a luxury that most could not afford, and those who could rarely found it where duty had placed them. Picture a world where marriage was architecture rather than poetry, where partnerships were built to support the weight of family alliances, land agreements, and social stability, rather than to shelter the tender growth of affection. Young people learned early that their hearts were not their own to give, but resources to be managed by parents, elders, and the careful calculations of political necessity. A samurai daughter might find herself promised to a man she had never seen, her marriage designed to strengthen her father's position or repay an old debt of honor. She would spend her wedding preparations learning not about her future husband's character, but about his family's expectations, his household's routines, the proper way to serve tea to his relatives and bow to his ancestors' portraits. The peasant families, with fewer resources to protect and smaller stakes in the game of social climbing, still followed the same basic rules. A strong back and a willingness to work mattered more than a pretty face or a charming laugh. The village matchmakers looked for practical compatibility. Could this young woman help with the harvest? Could this young man support a family? Would their children be healthy enough to carry on the family farm? But love, stubborn and unpredictable as spring water finding its way through stone, sometimes appeared anyway. It bloomed in stolen glances during festivals, in carefully worded poems passed through intermediaries, in the shared silence of two people who recognized something in each other that had nothing to do with duty or family planning. Such love was dangerous precisely because it was irrelevant to the larger machinery of society. It complicated arrangements, created divided loyalties, and suggested that individuals might have desires that mattered more than collective harmony. Young people who fell genuinely in love often faced the choice between their hearts and their families, between personal happiness and social survival. The lucky ones found ways to fall in love with their assigned partners, to discover affection growing slowly in the garden of shared responsibilities and daily companionship. Others learned to love duty itself, to find satisfaction in fulfilling their roles perfectly, even when their hearts remained elsewhere. In this world, where honor mattered more than comfort and duty outweighed desire, death was not a distant possibility, but a constant companion. Walking quietly beside every samurai who carried swords, every peasant who lived at the mercy of weather and tax collectors, every woman whose survival depended on successfully navigating the treacherous waters of family expectations and social judgment. Death here was not feared in the way we might imagine, but accepted as part of the natural order, like seasons changing or cherry blossoms falling. It was woven into the daily fabric of life so thoroughly that people learned to live with dignity in its presence rather than spending their energy trying to avoid it. For the samurai, death by sword was an occupational hazard, but death by shame was an ever-present possibility. They carried with them always the knowledge that certain failures, certain disgraces, certain moments of weakness could require the ultimate payment. Seppuku, the ritual suicide that restored honor through the willingness to take responsibility for one's failures, was not just a ceremony, but a philosophical statement about the value of reputation over life itself. The peasants faced death differently, but no less frequently. Disease, famine, natural disaster, and the simple wearing down of bodies that worked too hard for too long. All of these were facts of life that required acceptance rather than struggle. When the rice crop failed, when the floods came, when the tax collectors demanded more than could be given, death became simply another hardship to be endured with whatever dignity circumstances allowed. But perhaps most striking was how this constant awareness of mortality shaped the way people lived. Knowing that death could come suddenly, they developed rituals and practices that honored the preciousness of each day. The tea ceremony became a meditation on impermanence. The careful tending of gardens reflected an understanding that beauty was temporary and therefore more valuable. The precise observance of seasonal festivals acknowledged that time moved in cycles and each moment of celebration was worth savoring because it would not come again in quite the same way. Children learned early that life was fragile that parents and grandparents would not always be there, that the stability they knew could vanish with a single bad harvest or political upheaval.
Now let us climb the mountain of Japanese social hierarchy, step by careful step, observing how power flowed downward like water finding its level, and how responsibility, like smoke, rose upward to burden those who sat highest in the careful structure of feudal society. This was a world built on the understanding that chaos was always threatening to break through, and only the most rigid adherence to established order could keep the fabric of civilization from tearing apart. At the foundation of this elaborate pyramid sat the peasants, whose bent backs and muddy hands supported everything above them. They were the bedrock, essential and unmoving, expected to provide the rice and vegetables that fed everyone while asking for nothing more than the right to continue existing in their assigned role. Above them, the artisans and craftsmen who took raw materials and transformed them into useful and beautiful objects, their skills necessary, but their status carefully controlled. The merchants, despite their wealth, occupied a peculiar position in this hierarchy. They were needed, their ability to move goods and manage trade was essential to the functioning of society, but they were also suspect. Money earned without physical labor was considered somehow tainted, less honorable than wealth inherited or gained through service. So they learned to be prosperous quietly, to display their success modestly, and never to forget that their gold could not buy them the respect automatically given to a samurai with empty pockets. At the peak of this mountain sat the samurai, warriors and administrators who served their daimyo with the same devotion that monks offered to their gods. But even they were not free. They lived in constant awareness that their lord could demand their lives at any moment, that their honor was only as secure as their last act of loyalty, that their elevated status came with obligations that could crush them as surely as poverty crushed the peasants below. And above the samurai sat the daimyos themselves, regional lords who commanded armies and governed provinces, but who lived always in the shadow of the shogun's power. They walked a tightrope between independence and submission, wealthy and powerful enough to be dangerous, but never secure enough to be comfortable. Even the shogun, the military dictator who ruled all of Japan, carried burdens that few could imagine. Every decision rippled downward through the entire structure of society. Every policy had consequences that could strengthen or weaken the delicate balance that kept the realm from fragmenting into chaos. This hierarchy was not maintained by force alone, though force was always available when needed. It was sustained by a shared belief that order was more important than individual happiness, that everyone's willingness to stay in their assigned place was what prevented the kind of civil wars that had torn Japan apart in earlier centuries. Let us enter now the quiet chambers where knowledge was passed from one generation to the next, where learning was both precious and dangerous, available to some and denied to others based not on intelligence or curiosity, but on the circumstances of birth and the careful calculations of social stability. Education in feudal Japan was never neutral. It was always designed to prepare people for their predetermined roles in society's elaborate dance. For the children of samurai families, education began early and encompassed far more than reading and writing. They learned the physical skills that would keep them alive, swordsmanship, archery, horseback riding, but also the cultural refinements that marked them as worthy of their elevated status. Poetry, calligraphy, the tea ceremony, flower arrangement, music, all of these were considered essential elements of a complete education, ways of demonstrating that a true warrior was not merely a skilled killer, but a person of cultivation and depth. Their studies included Chinese classics, philosophical texts that taught them about duty, loyalty, and the proper ordering of society. They memorized poems that had been passed down for generations, learning not just the words, but the occasions when each poem might be appropriately quoted, the subtle ways that literary knowledge could be used to navigate social situations and demonstrate one's worthiness to participate in the refined conversations of the ruling class. The merchant families provided their children with practical education, arithmetic for keeping accounts, literacy for conducting business, and enough cultural knowledge to avoid embarrassing themselves in the company of their social superiors. Their learning was focused and utilitarian, designed to help them succeed in trade without giving them ideas above their station. For the vast majority of the population, the peasant children who would spend their lives in rice fields, education was limited to what was necessary for survival and service. They learned the skills their parents could teach them: how to read weather patterns, how to care for animals, how to plant and harvest crops, how to repair tools and maintain irrigation systems. Some might learn enough reading and writing to understand tax notices and official proclamations, but formal schooling was a luxury their families could not afford and society saw no reason to provide. The daughters of all classes faced additional restrictions. Even in wealthy families, their education focused on domestic skills and cultural accomplishments that would make them attractive marriage prospects and capable household managers. They might learn to read and write, but their knowledge was expected to remain within appropriate feminine boundaries, never challenging the masculine domains of politics, military strategy, or serious scholarship. In this world where every gesture carried meaning and every object was arranged with purpose, beauty was not a luxury, but a necessity. Not a decoration, but a language spoken through flowers, tea bowls, and the precise movements of hands that had been trained to find grace even in the most mundane activities. Let us move quietly through this landscape, where aesthetics and spirituality intertwined like lovers' fingers, where the arrangement of a room or the folding of a kimono became acts of meditation and worship. The tea ceremony, perhaps more than any other ritual, embodied this fusion of beauty and meaning. Every element, the selection of the tea bowl, the temperature of the water, the arrangement of flowers in the alcove, the precise movements of the host's hands, was choreographed not for show, but for the creation of a perfect moment, a temporary sanctuary where the chaos of daily life could be held at bay by the power of concentrated attention to beauty. Guests at a tea ceremony learned to notice details that others might overlook. The way light fell across the surface of the tea, the subtle fragrance released by the warming of the ceramic cup, the sound of water being poured with exactly the right rhythm. This wasn't mere appreciation of beautiful objects, it was training in awareness, a practice that taught the mind to find peace in the perfect execution of simple tasks. Calligraphy served a similar purpose, transforming the practical act of writing into a form of moving meditation. Each brush stroke was a breath, each character a prayer, each completed work a temporary creation that captured a moment of perfect balance between intention and execution. The calligrapher learned to quiet the restless chatter of everyday concerns and speak directly through the movement of brush against paper, creating beauty that was both personal and universal, both individual expression and adherence to centuries of tradition. Even the arrangement of flowers, ikebana, became a way of practicing harmony with natural rhythms, of learning to see the essential structure beneath surface appearances, of finding balance between human intention and natural form. The flower arranger learned to work with the materials at hand, to discover the inherent beauty in branches and blossoms rather than imposing arbitrary standards of prettiness upon them. Gardens, too, served as outdoor temples where every stone, every path, every carefully placed tree was designed to create specific emotional and spiritual responses in those who walked through them.
These were not casual collections of pretty plants, but carefully composed poems written in living materials. Spaces designed to encourage contemplation and provide refuge from the more demanding aspects of social life.
As we near the end of our gentle journey through feudal Japan, let us pause to consider how the human spirit learned to flourish even within the constraints of this highly regulated world. How people found ways to express their individuality and maintain their dignity even when society seemed determined to reduce them to their social functions. Despite all the rules and restrictions, all the careful hierarchies and prescribed behaviors, people still fell in love inappropriately, still had dreams that extended beyond their assigned roles, still found ways to laugh quietly at the absurdities of their circumstances. The poetry that survived from this era reveals hearts that beat with the same hopes and fears that move us today, minds that questioned, even when questioning was dangerous, souls that yearned for beauty and meaning, even when beauty and meaning had to be found in stolen moments and secret thoughts. The festivals and seasonal celebrations provided sanctioned opportunities for the social order to relax slightly, for peasants to drink sake and dance without worrying about perfect posture, for young people to catch glimpses of each other across crowded temple courtyards, for everyone to participate in the larger rhythms of life that connected them to something greater than their individual circumstances. Folk tales and stories passed down through generations carried messages that couldn't be spoken directly. Lessons about cleverness triumphing over power, about kindness being rewarded even when it seemed futile, about ordinary people finding extraordinary courage when circumstances demanded it. These stories provided a kind of spiritual nutrition, feeding hopes and dreams that the official culture didn't acknowledge but couldn't entirely suppress. Music, too, found ways to survive and provide comfort. The farmer returning from his fields might hum melodies that helped him forget his aching back. The merchant's daughter might play simple songs on her koto that expressed feelings she could never speak aloud. The samurai might find peace in the discipline of learning traditional pieces that connected him to the deeper cultural currents flowing beneath the surface of political and social obligations. Even in their acceptance of fate, there was a kind of quiet rebellion, the decision to live with grace despite circumstances, to find beauty in unexpected places, to maintain human dignity in the face of systems that often seem designed to crush individual identity. This was not the rebellion of revolution, but the rebellion of persistence, the refusal to let difficult circumstances destroy the capacity for joy, love, and hope.
Now, dear friends, as our exploration of feudal Japan draws to its quiet close, let us allow our spirits to drift across centuries and continents like cherry blossoms carried on ancient winds to distant shores. The disciplined world of samurai and peasants, of honor codes and rice taxes, begins to fade like morning mist as we prepare to journey to another time, another place, where a different kind of courage was being tested against the vast backdrop of history. Take a moment to let the images settle, the careful movements of the tea ceremony, the gentle splash of cold water on morning faces, the whispered conversations in candlelit rooms where wrong words could cost more than pride. These were real people, living real lives, finding real joy and sorrow within the boundaries their world had drawn around them. Their struggles and triumphs, their small rebellions and great sacrifices remind us that human dignity has always found ways to flourish, even in the most constraining circumstances. As we leave behind the ordered world of medieval Japan, we carry with us an appreciation for the complex beauty that can emerge from rigid structure, the unexpected grace that can develop when people learn to move within carefully defined limits. The cherry blossoms that marked their season still fall each spring, and somewhere in their quiet descent,
we can still glimpse the spirits of those who learned to find eternity in brief moments of perfect beauty. But history calls us onward, across the Mediterranean Sea to an ancient world where empires clashed like storms upon the ocean, where a woman whose name echoes still across 25 centuries first stepped onto the deck of a warship and changed forever what was possible for those who dared to claim their place in a world that had no intention of making room for them. Let your breathing slow as we make this transition. Let your mind drift peacefully from the disciplined gardens of Japan to the sun-warmed waters where ancient ships once carried the dreams and ambitions of civilizations. The story continues, but it changes, like water taking the shape of whatever vessel holds it, like human courage adapting to whatever challenges each age presents. Close your eyes if you wish and imagine the sound of waves against hull, the creak of wooden ships built by hands that understood the sea's moods, the salt air that carried both opportunity and danger to those brave enough to venture beyond the safety of familiar shores. In the warm waters of the Aegean Sea, where sunlight danced on waves that had carried the ships of heroes and the dreams of empires, there lived a woman who refused to accept the limitations that her world tried to place upon her shoulders. Her name was Artemisia, Queen of Halicarnassus, and her story unfolds like a scroll written in starlight and seawater, a tale that challenges everything we think we know about power, loyalty, and the courage to stand alone when history demands it. Picture, if you will, the ancient world, a place where women were expected to remain in the shadows, where power was presumed to be a masculine domain, where warfare was considered far too dangerous and complex for feminine minds to comprehend. Into this world stepped Artemisia, carrying herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had never accepted the word impossible as anything more than an invitation to prove otherwise. She ruled Halicarnassus, a beautiful city on the southwestern coast of what we now call Turkey, where white stone buildings climbed the hillsides like steps leading to the heavens, and where the harbor welcomed ships from across the Mediterranean. This was not a realm she had inherited by accident or received as a gift from male relatives eager to maintain family honor. This was power she had claimed and held through intelligence, strategy, and a will that bent to no authority except her own understanding of what was right. When Xerxes, the great Persian emperor, began planning his legendary invasion of Greece, Artemisia made a choice that shocked both her friends and her enemies. She volunteered to join his fleet, not as a figurehead or a symbol, but as a commander who would risk her life and her ships in battle alongside the greatest warriors of her age. She brought 5 vessels from her own harbor, sleek and fast ships that could move like dancers across the water, and she led them personally into waters where death waited beneath every wave. This was not the choice that anyone expected from a Greek queen. To side with Persia against her own people required either treachery or vision, and those who knew Artemisia understood that she was incapable of the former and possessed more than enough of the latter to navigate the treacherous currents of ancient politics. Her decision would echo across centuries, inspiring some and horrifying others, but never failing to command the respect of those who understood that true leadership sometimes requires the courage to stand alone, even when the entire world questions your judgment. As Artemisia's ships joined the vast Persian fleet gathering in preparation for the invasion of Greece, she brought with her something more valuable than additional vessels or experienced sailors. She brought the one thing that Xerxes, for all his power and wealth, could rarely find among his advisors: the willingness to tell him the truth,
even when the truth was inconvenient, uncomfortable, or contrary to what he wanted to hear. In the glittering councils of war, surrounded by generals whose victories were measured in conquered cities and subordinated peoples, Artemisia's voice stood out, not for her appearance or her royal title, but for the clarity of her thinking and the precision of her strategic vision. While others competed to offer the most flattering assessments of Persian strength and Greek weakness, she provided analysis based on careful observation rather than wishful thinking. When the question of naval strategy arose, particularly regarding the planned assault on the Greek fleet at Salamis, Artemisia's voice cut through the confident chatter of her male colleagues with warnings that proved prophetic. She understood something that the others, drunk on the intoxicating prospect of easy victory, had failed to grasp, that the narrow straits near Athens would neutralize Persia's numerical advantage and play to Greek strengths in ship handling and tactical maneuvering. Her advice was clear and unwelcome. Avoid the trap that the Greeks were setting, keep the fleet in open waters where Persian numbers could tell, and find victory through patience rather than through the kind of dramatic assault that made for inspiring stories but poor military outcomes. It was the counsel of someone who understood that real warfare bore little resemblance to the heroic tales that entertained civilians. Someone who had learned that survival often required the unglamorous choice of strategic withdrawal over glorious attack. But Xerxes, like so many powerful rulers throughout history, found himself caught between the intoxicating pull of glory and the sobering voice of practical wisdom. The Persian king was surrounded by advisors whose careers depended on telling him what they believed he wanted to hear, men whose own reputations were built on victories rather than prudent restraint. Picture those war councils, if you will, held in magnificent tents where the air was thick with incense and ambition. Maps spread across low tables marked with the movements of armies that stretched across continents. In such a setting, Artemisia's voice must have seemed almost otherworldly, calm, analytical, untouched by the masculine posturing that dominated military planning. She spoke of terrain as if she could read it like poetry, understanding how the narrow straits at Salamis would compress the Persian fleet's advantage into a disadvantage. She knew that ships, like people, need room to maneuver, space to breathe, water deep enough to turn without colliding with allies. The Greeks, she warned, were drawing them into a trap disguised as an opportunity. But there's something almost tragically familiar about what happened next. The advisor who speaks truth finds herself overruled by those who speak to vanity. Xerxes, perhaps feeling the weight of an empire's expectations, chose the counsel that promised spectacle over the wisdom that promised survival. And so, as the Persian fleet sailed toward Salamis, Artemisia found herself committed to a battle she had advised against, commanding ships in waters she knew would favor their enemies. It was a position many wise counselors have found themselves in throughout history, bound by loyalty to support decisions they knew to be flawed, carrying the burden of foresight in a world determined to learn through painful experience. Yet even in this impossible situation, Artemisia would find a way to demonstrate the very qualities that made her counsel so valuable: adaptability, courage, and the kind of strategic thinking that could turn disaster into survival through sheer force of will and clarity of mind.
The morning of the Battle of Salamis dawned with the kind of deceptive calm that often precedes chaos. Picture the scene, dear friends. Hundreds of ships arranged in formations that looked orderly from a distance, but would soon dissolve into confusion once the fighting began. The Persian fleet, massive and confident, moved into the narrow waters like a great beast entering a cage it didn't realize had been designed to trap it. Artemisia, commanding her flagship from the center of this vast armada, must have felt the weight of her unanswered warnings as she watched the Greek vessels take their positions. They moved with the confidence of fighters on familiar ground, each ship's captain knowing exactly where the water grew shallow, where the currents would help or hinder, where an enemy vessel might find itself suddenly vulnerable. As the battle commenced, the predictions Artemisia had made began to unfold with terrible precision. The Persian ships, so formidable in open water, found themselves cramped and clumsy in the confined straits. Collisions became inevitable as captains tried to maneuver around allies while pursuing enemies. The Greeks, smaller but more agile, darted between the larger vessels like wolves among cattle, striking quickly before disappearing into the maze of ships and spray. And then, in the midst of this unfolding disaster, Artemisia found herself in a situation that would test every ounce of her strategic brilliance. A Greek warship had locked onto her vessel, pursuing her with the relentless focus of a hunter who had identified the most valuable prey on the battlefield. Escape seemed impossible. Other ships blocked her path, the shoreline offered no refuge, and her pursuer was gaining ground with every stroke of the oars. What happened next has echoed through history as one of the most controversial and brilliant tactical decisions ever made. Faced with capture or destruction, Artemisia ordered her ship to ram and sink another Persian vessel, one commanded by an allied king who had probably sat beside her in those very war councils where she had urged caution. The move was so unexpected, so audacious in its calculated betrayal, that it achieved exactly what she intended. The Greek captain, seeing what appeared to be a Persian ship attacking its own allies, assumed that Artemisia must have switched sides in the middle of the battle. The pursuit ended instantly, and she slipped away into the chaos, her ship intact, her crew alive, her reputation forever marked by this moment of terrible pragmatism.
From his viewing point on a hilltop overlooking the battle, Xerxes watched the destruction of his naval dreams unfold like a nightmare played out in miniature. Ship after ship of his mighty fleet fell victim to Greek tactics, superior positioning, and the very geographical constraints that Artemisia had warned him about. But in the midst of this catastrophe, he witnessed something that both horrified and amazed him. When he saw Artemisia's ship ram the Allied vessel, Xerxes reportedly turned to his advisors and made one of the most famous observations in military history. "My men have become women, and my women have become men." It was perhaps the highest praise he could offer, an acknowledgement that in a fleet full of brave warriors, the one person who had shown both courage and competence was the queen he had initially brought along as much for novelty as for her naval expertise. The irony wasn't lost on those who heard him. While his male commanders fell victim to confusion, panic, or simple bad luck, the woman they had all underestimated had demonstrated exactly the kind of clear-headed decision-making that separates great leaders from mere title holders. She had sacrificed one ship to save another, one ally to preserve her own capability to continue fighting, and in doing so had shown a grasp of battlefield priorities that her male colleagues seemed to lack. But Artemisia's most controversial decision came with consequences she would have to live with for the rest of her days. The allied king whose ship she had destroyed, his fate became part of her legend, a dark thread woven through what might otherwise have been a simple story of tactical brilliance. History doesn't record whether she felt regret for that choice, whether she ever wondered about the families of the sailors who died to preserve her own crew, whether the weight of that decision haunted her quiet moments. What we do know is that she survived when many others didn't, and that survival allowed her to continue serving as one of Xerxes' most trusted advisors. In the aftermath of Salamis, when other commanders were either dead or disgraced, Artemisia remained valuable precisely because she had proven her ability to think clearly under pressure and make the kinds of hard choices that leadership sometimes demands. The Persian fleet limped home, its reputation shattered and its strength broken,
But Artemisia returned not as a survivor of a disaster, but as the architect of her own preservation in the face of impossible odds. In the wake of the disaster at Salamis, as the Persian war machine struggled to maintain its momentum, Xerxes found himself turning once again to the advisor who had proven herself not just brave, but prophetic. The great emperor, accustomed to commanding through strength and intimidation, discovered the value of someone who could see clearly through the fog of imperial pride and military necessity. Picture the scene, if you will, the Persian court, no longer filled with the confident chatter of certain victory, but subdued by the reality of unexpected defeat. In this atmosphere of uncertainty and recrimination, Artemisia once again found herself in the position of offering counsel that no one else dared to voice. Xerxes, perhaps finally understanding that honest advice was more valuable than flattering reassurance, asked her directly what he should do next. Her answer came without hesitation and without the diplomatic softening that usually accompanied advice to emperors. "Retreat," she told him. "Return to Persia while you still can claim some measure of success. Leave the capable General Mardonius to continue the land campaign, but remove yourself from a situation that can only diminish your prestige further if it continues to go poorly." It was advice that took tremendous courage to give. Telling an emperor to retreat is never popular counsel, especially when that emperor has invested so much of his reputation in a grand military adventure. But Artemisia understood something that many of Xerxes' other advisors missed, that sometimes the most heroic choice is knowing when to stop, when to preserve what can be preserved rather than risking everything on increasingly desperate gambles. Remarkably, Xerxes listened. The man who had ignored her warnings about Salamis now followed her advice about withdrawal. It was a testament to how completely she had proven herself, not just as a naval commander or a political ally, but as someone whose judgment could be trusted even when it contradicted every instinct of pride and ambition. The honor that followed was unprecedented. Xerxes entrusted her with the care of his own sons, not a ceremonial position, but a role that required absolute trust and demonstrated complete confidence in her loyalty and wisdom. In the Persian court, where family succession was literally a matter of life and death for the empire, this appointment marked her as one of the most trusted figures in the entire realm.
And so, dear friends, Artemisia fades from the active stage of history. But her legacy ripples outward like the wake of her ships long after they disappeared over the horizon. She returned to Halicarnassus not merely as a queen, but as a figure who had redefined what was possible for those willing to think clearly and act boldly in a world that often rewarded neither quality. But as we let her story settle gently into the past, let us allow our minds to drift upward, beyond the concerns of earthly empires and naval battles, to the vast canopy of stars that witnessed all these ancient dramas with eternal patience. Long before Artemisia sailed her ships across the Mediterranean, long before the Persian Empire stretched from India to Egypt, human beings were already engaged in a different kind of exploration, one that required no ships, no armies, no conquest of foreign lands. They were exploring the heavens with nothing but their eyes, their curiosity, and their remarkable ability to find patterns in apparent chaos. These ancient astronomers, working without telescopes or satellites, without computers or even accurate clocks, managed to decode the movements of celestial bodies with a precision that still amazes us today. Picture them, if you will. Sumerian priests climbing ziggurats in the pre-dawn darkness, Egyptian architects aligning pyramids with stellar precision, Mayan mathematicians calculating the orbits of planets with astounding accuracy. They looked up at the same stars we see today, but they saw in them not just beauty, but meaning, order, and the very foundation of civilized life. Tonight, as we continue our gentle journey together, we'll walk among these ancient skywatchers, learning how they transformed the simple act of looking up
into one of humanity's first and most enduring sciences. We'll discover how they used stone and shadow, patience and mathematics to create calendars that still govern our lives and to predict celestial events with an accuracy that wouldn't be surpassed for thousands of years. Let your breathing slow as we make this transition from the turbulent waters of ancient warfare to the eternal peace of the star-filled sky. The same moon that lit Artemisia's ships now guides us toward these quiet observers who found infinity in the space between sunset and dawn.
In the fertile river valleys between the Tigris and Euphrates, where humanity first learned to shape clay into writing and grain into civilization, the ancient Sumerians made a discovery that would echo through all subsequent history. They realized that the heavens moved in patterns, not randomly, not chaotically, but with a rhythm as reliable as the flooding of their rivers and the turning of their seasons. Imagine those first astronomer priests climbing their stepped ziggurats in the hours before dawn, when the air was cool and the stars shone with crystal clarity. They carried with them clay tablets and reed styluses, ready to record their observations in the wedge-shaped script we now call cuneiform. But they weren't just transcribing what they saw, they were beginning to understand that the sky was a vast clock, its hands made of planets and stars, its face the entire dome of heaven. These early observers noticed that certain bright wandering stars, what we now call planets, followed predictable paths across the background of fixed constellations. Venus disappeared and reappeared with stunning regularity. The moon cycled through its phases in a pattern that repeated endlessly. The sun traced its annual journey from one constellation to another with the precision of a master craftsman following an ancient design. From these observations, the Sumerians created one of humanity's first systematic calendars, dividing the year into lunar months and developing the mathematical framework that still governs our measurement of time. When you glance at a clock and see 60 minutes in an hour, or use a compass marked with 360 degrees, you're employing a system of measurement that traces back to these patient stargazers working by lamplight over 4,000 years ago. Their greatest gift to posterity wasn't just mathematical precision, but the revolutionary idea that the universe operates according to discoverable laws. The gods, they realized, didn't move the stars capriciously. They followed patterns that human intelligence could decode and predict. This insight transformed astronomy from superstition into the first recognizable science. The Sumerians understood something profound that we sometimes forget in our modern rush, that watching the sky requires not just clear nights, but clear thinking. Not just good eyes, but good records. Not just curiosity, but patience measured in lifetimes of careful observation.
The intellectual heirs of the Sumerians, the Babylonians, took their ancestors' careful observations and transformed them into something approaching the mathematical astronomy we recognize today. Working in the same river valleys, using the same basic tools of eye and stylus, they achieved a level of predictive accuracy that wouldn't be surpassed until the invention of mechanical instruments over 1,000 years later. Picture the Babylonian astronomers hunched over their tablets in flickering lamplight, not merely recording what they saw, but calculating what they would see. They had discovered something extraordinary, that the apparent chaos of planetary motion could be reduced to mathematical formulas. Mars might seem to wander erratically among the stars, but its wanderings followed a pattern that could be predicted years in advance, with nothing more sophisticated than arithmetic and endless patience. Their great achievement was the prediction of eclipses using what we now call the Saros cycle. a period of roughly 18 years, after which eclipses repeat in nearly identical patterns. They didn't understand why this cycle worked. They had no knowledge of orbital mechanics or gravitational forces. But they didn't need to understand the underlying physics to use the pattern effectively. They had discovered that mathematics could be a form of prophecy, that numbers could peer into the future more reliably than any oracle. The tablets they left behind read like poetry written in numbers. Endless columns of calculations tracking the positions of planets, the phases of the moon, the timing of eclipses. These weren't just academic exercises, they were the foundation of royal policy and religious ceremony. Kings scheduled coronations to coincide with favorable celestial events. Priests timed festivals to match the rhythms of the sky. But perhaps most remarkably, the Babylonians created the first star maps, not drawings but mathematical descriptions of the heavens that could be used by anyone with the skill to read their numerical language. They divided the sky into the 12 regions we still call the zodiac, gave names to constellations that we still use today, and created a system for describing stellar positions that would influence astronomy for millennia. They accomplished all of this without ever leaving the ground, without any magnifying instruments, with nothing but human intelligence applied systematically to the patient observation of light moving across darkness.
Along the banks of the Nile, where the annual flood brought both life and the urgent need to predict its timing, the ancient Egyptians developed their own intimate relationship with the stars. For them, astronomy wasn't an abstract science, but a practical necessity woven into the very fabric of survival and civilization. The star that governed their world was Sirius, the brightest point of light in the night sky, whose annual reappearance just before dawn coincided with the flooding of the Nile, with such reliability that it became the cornerstone of their calendar. This wasn't mere coincidence. It was cosmic design that allowed them to create a solar year of 365 days that remained accurate for centuries, a remarkable achievement for a civilization working without mechanical clocks or telescopes. Imagine the Egyptian priest astronomers watching from their temple rooftops, waiting through the months when Sirius remained hidden below the horizon, then noting with careful precision the moment when it rose again in the pre-dawn sky. That moment, the heliacal rising of Sirius, marked not just the beginning of their new year, but the signal for farmers throughout the kingdom to prepare for the flood that would make their crops possible. But the Egyptians didn't stop with practical astronomy. They built eternity itself in stone, aligning their greatest monuments with stellar precision that still awes modern architects. The Great Pyramid of Giza points to the cardinal directions with an accuracy that modern instruments can barely improve upon. Its internal passages may have been aimed at specific stars, creating a kind of astronomical clock built from millions of limestone blocks. Their temples, too, were designed as earthbound observatories. The great temple complex at Karnak was oriented so that the rising sun would shine directly down its central axis on the summer solstice, creating a moment when the boundaries between earthly architecture and celestial mechanics dissolved into pure golden light. The Egyptians understood that time wasn't just duration, it was rhythm, pattern, the eternal dance between human needs and heavenly cycles. Their art, their architecture, their entire civilization was an attempt to create harmony between human society and cosmic order, to build a culture that moved in synchrony with the stars themselves.
Deep in the rainforests of Mesoamerica, where jaguars hunted beneath pyramid temples and the air hung thick with mist and mystery, the ancient Maya created what may have been the most sophisticated astronomical system in the pre-telescopic world. Working without metal tools, without wheels, without beasts of burden, they achieved a mathematical understanding of celestial mechanics that rivals our own modern calculations. The Maya were time-obsessed in the most beautiful way possible. They didn't just create calendars, they created multiple interlocking calendar systems that could track time from the scale of individual days to spans covering thousands of years. Their long count calendar could pinpoint any date in a cycle lasting over 5,000 years, while their ritual calendar tracked the sacred rhythms that governed religious and social life. But their true genius lay in their observation of Venus, that brilliant wandering star that appears as both morning and evening star throughout the year. The Maya tracked Venus with such precision that their calculations of its orbital period, 584 days, differ from our modern measurements by less than a single day. This wasn't achieved through casual stargazing, but through centuries of systematic observation and mathematical analysis that required keeping accurate records across multiple generations. Picture their astronomer priests working by firelight in chambers carved from living rock, their codex books spread before them covered in the intricate glyphs that recorded not just what they had seen, but what they calculated they would see. The Dresden Codex, one of the few Maya books to survive the Spanish conquest, contains astronomical tables that predict the movements of Venus with stunning accuracy across centuries of future time. Their observatories weren't domed buildings filled with brass instruments, but massive stone structures designed to frame specific celestial events. At Chichen Itza, the Caracol Observatory was built with windows positioned to track the extreme positions of Venus as it swings north and south in its orbit. El Castillo, the famous stepped pyramid, was designed so that the equinox sun creates the shadow of a feathered serpent descending its stairs. A marriage of architecture and astronomy that transforms an entire building into a seasonal calendar. The Maya understood that time wasn't linear, but cyclical, that the present moment was just one point in vast wheels of repetition that connected human life to cosmic rhythms larger than individual experience or even individual civilizations.
In ancient China, the study of the heavens was never merely academic, it was a matter of imperial legitimacy and national survival. The emperor ruled not by conquest alone, but by the mandate of heaven, a divine endorsement that could be revoked if the stars sent warning signs of royal failure or cosmic displeasure. This made Chinese astronomy unique among ancient sciences. It was simultaneously rigorous and political, mathematical and mystical, serving both the pursuit of knowledge and the preservation of royal power. The emperor's court astronomers held positions of tremendous responsibility. They were expected not just to observe and record, but to interpret celestial events in ways that supported the stability of the realm. Imagine the pressure faced by these court astronomers as they climbed to their observation platforms each night, knowing that an unexpected comet or an incorrectly predicted eclipse could be interpreted as evidence that the emperor had lost heaven's favor. They kept meticulous records not just out of scientific curiosity, but because their lives and the stability of the empire might depend on their accuracy. Yet this pressure produced remarkable results. Chinese astronomical records stretch back over 2,000 years with a consistency and detail that modern scientists still rely upon to verify ancient celestial events. They documented supernovae, comets, and eclipses with such precision that contemporary astronomers use their records to study phenomena that occurred centuries before telescopes were invented. The Chinese understanding of the sky was fundamentally different from Western approaches. They saw the heavens as a celestial bureaucracy that mirrored the earthly government. Different regions of the sky were associated with different aspects of imperial administration. Stars were grouped not into mythological figures, but into patterns that reflected the organization of Chinese society and government.
Their mechanical ingenuity in service of astronomy was extraordinary. They built water-powered celestial globes that rotated in synchrony with the sky, mechanical clocks that tracked both earthly hours and stellar positions, and armillary spheres of bronze that allowed precise measurement of celestial coordinates. These weren't primitive instruments, but sophisticated machines that wouldn't be equaled in the West for centuries. The Chinese approach to astronomy reflected their broader philosophy. The universe was orderly, hierarchical, and comprehensible to patient study and careful reasoning. Heaven and earth were connected by invisible threads of correspondence and influence that could be mapped, measured, and predicted by those with sufficient dedication and mathematical skill.
In the ancient kingdoms of India, where the Ganges carries prayers and ashes toward the sea, astronomy developed as both a practical science and a spiritual discipline. Known as Jyotisha, the science of light, Indian astronomy represented perhaps the most philosophically sophisticated approach to understanding the heavens developed in the ancient world. The earliest Indian astronomical thinking appears in the Vedas, sacred texts that describe the universe as a vast, interconnected system where mathematical relationships reflect divine harmony. But Indian astronomers didn't remain content with poetic descriptions. They developed mathematical tools and theoretical frameworks that were centuries ahead of their time. The great Indian mathematician astronomer Aryabhata, working in the 5th century CE, proposed ideas that wouldn't be accepted in Europe for another 1,000 years. He suggested that the Earth rotates on its axis daily, calculated the length of the year with extraordinary precision, and developed trigonometric methods for astronomical calculations that were far more sophisticated than anything available in the West. Picture Aryabhata working by oil lamp in his observatory, surrounded by palm leaf manuscripts covered with Sanskrit mathematical notation, calculating planetary positions using geometric methods that wouldn't be rediscovered in Europe until the Renaissance. His work represented a perfect fusion of mathematical rigor and cosmological vision. He saw the universe not just as a collection of moving lights, but as an elegant mathematical system whose patterns revealed fundamental truths about the nature of existence itself. Indian observatories were marvels of architectural astronomy, massive stone instruments designed to measure celestial positions with naked-eye precision that modern instruments can barely improve upon. The Jantar-Mantar observatories, built centuries later but based on ancient principles, included sundials the size of buildings and curved walls that could track the movement of stars with remarkable accuracy. But what made Indian astronomy truly unique was its integration with spiritual practice. Indian astronomers saw their work not as separate from religious or philosophical inquiry, but as another path toward understanding the divine order that underlies apparent chaos. They calculated eclipse times for religious ceremonies, determined auspicious moments for important events, and developed horoscopic systems that linked individual destiny to cosmic rhythms. The Indian vision of astronomy was fundamentally holistic. They understood that studying the heavens was ultimately a way of studying consciousness itself, that the patterns of planetary motion reflected the deeper patterns that govern all existence, from the largest cycles of cosmic time to the most intimate rhythms of human life.
When the ancient Greeks looked up at the night sky, they saw not just patterns and cycles, but questions. Questions that demanded answers based on reason rather than tradition, logic rather than authority, mathematical proof rather than inherited wisdom. This approach transformed astronomy from a collection of useful techniques into something recognizably similar to modern science. The Greek Revolution in astronomical thinking began with simple but profound questions. Why do the planets move as they do? What are the stars made of?
Is there a rational explanation for celestial phenomena that doesn't depend on the whims of gods or the mysterious workings of fate? These questions led them to develop the first geometric models of the universe, attempts to explain the complex motions of celestial bodies using mathematical principles. Pythagoras and his followers believed that the universe was fundamentally mathematical, that the relationships between planetary orbits could be expressed in terms of musical harmonies, that the cosmos was literally a symphony played out on a scale too vast for human ears to hear directly. This music of the spheres wasn't just poetry, it was an early attempt to find mathematical laws governing celestial motion. Aristarchus of Samos made perhaps the most daring intellectual leap in ancient astronomy when he proposed that the Earth orbits the Sun rather than the reverse. His heliocentric model was rejected by his contemporaries. It contradicted both common sense and careful observation, but it planted a seed of an idea that would eventually transform our entire understanding of our place in the cosmos. The greatest of the Greek astronomical synthesizers was Claudius Ptolemy, whose geocentric model dominated Western thought for over 1,000 years. Ptolemy's system was wrong about the structure of the solar system, but it was brilliantly successful at predicting planetary positions using a complex geometry of circles within circles, epicycles and deferents that could account for the apparent backward motion of planets with mathematical precision. Picture Ptolemy working in the Great Library of Alexandria, surrounded by scrolls containing the accumulated astronomical wisdom of Egypt, Babylon, and Greece, attempting to create a unified theory that could explain all celestial phenomena using pure geometry. His model was intricate almost beyond belief, but it worked. It allowed astronomers to predict eclipses, planetary positions, and seasonal changes with remarkable accuracy. The Greeks gave astronomy something it had never possessed before: the conviction that the universe operates according to rational principles that human intelligence can discover and understand. Even when their specific theories proved incorrect, this fundamental approach, the idea that nature follows mathematical laws discoverable through observation and reason, became the foundation of all subsequent scientific thinking. As we near the gentle conclusion of our journey through ancient astronomy, let us pause to appreciate the extraordinary achievement represented by these early skywatchers. Working with nothing more sophisticated than the human eye, stone markers, and bronze instruments, they mapped the heavens with a precision that remained unsurpassed for centuries after telescopes were invented. Their legacy surrounds us in ways we rarely consider. Every time we check a calendar, we're using mathematical concepts developed by ancient astronomers. Every time we navigate using GPS, we're employing principles first discovered by observers who climbed ziggurats and pyramids to get a clearer view of the stars. The very concept of scientific method, the idea that natural phenomena can be understood through systematic observation and mathematical analysis, was born from the patient work of these ancient stargazers. But perhaps their greatest gift to posterity wasn't technical, but philosophical. They taught us that the universe is comprehensible, that human intelligence can decode the patterns hidden in apparent chaos, that we are not separate from the cosmos, but part of an elegant system that extends from the smallest scales of earthly life to the largest scales of galactic motion. These ancient astronomers worked in solitude and silence, recording their observations by lamplight, calculating planetary positions with reed pens and papyrus, building stone calendars that would outlast their civilizations. They couldn't have imagined satellites or space telescopes, but they laid the intellectual foundation that made such technologies possible. Tonight, when you look up at the stars, remember that you're seeing the same lights that guided Sumerian farmers, inspired Egyptian architects, and challenged Greek philosophers to ask the deepest questions about the nature of reality.
The stars haven't changed, but our understanding of them rests on thousands of years of careful observation by people who found eternity in the space between sunset and dawn. Their names are mostly lost to us now, but their work endures in every astronomical calculation, in every space mission, in every moment when human curiosity reaches beyond the boundaries of Earth to touch the infinite mystery that surrounds us all.
And now, dear friends, let us allow our spirits to drift across centuries and continents once more, from ancient observatories where patient astronomers tracked the eternal dance of planets, to a moment in more recent history when the very shape of a young nation would be transformed by a single, unexpected opportunity. The year was 1803, and the United States of America was still learning what it meant to be a country. Picture a nation hugging the Atlantic coast, looking westward with equal measures of curiosity and uncertainty toward vast territories that remained largely unmapped and unknown. The Mississippi River marked not just a geographical boundary, but the edge of American ambitions, the place where the familiar ended and the mysterious began. In this atmosphere of cautious expansion and limited resources, President Thomas Jefferson harbored a relatively modest goal: to secure American access to the vital port of New Orleans. The young nation's economy depended heavily on river trade. Farmers in the Ohio Valley needed a way to float their goods to market. Merchants required reliable transportation routes, and everyone understood that whoever controlled New Orleans held the keys to commercial prosperity. But history has a way of presenting opportunities that no one expects, and sometimes the most significant changes come not from careful planning, but from the intersection of distant events and local needs. In the palaces of Paris, Napoleon Bonaparte was discovering that empire building in the Americas was far more expensive and difficult than he had anticipated. The French emperor had dreams of a grand colonial revival. Louisiana would supply the sugar islands of the Caribbean, creating a self-sufficient French empire in the New World. But the Haitian Revolution had shattered those dreams with the force of human determination and tropical disease. French armies sent to crush the rebellion found themselves facing not just military resistance, but yellow fever, an enemy that killed soldiers more efficiently than any opposing army. As Napoleon watched his American ambitions crumble in the Caribbean heat, Louisiana transformed from an asset into a liability, from a valuable territory into an expensive burden that diverted resources from his European wars. And so, in one of those moments that pivot on the intersection of grand strategy and practical necessity, the French emperor made a decision that would echo across centuries.
When American diplomats Robert Livingston and James Monroe arrived in Paris with authorization to offer $10 million for New Orleans and some surrounding territory, they found themselves facing an offer so unexpected that they could hardly believe what they were hearing. Napoleon wasn't interested in selling just the port city. He wanted to sell the entire Louisiana territory, over 800,000 square miles of land stretching from the Mississippi to the Rocky Mountains. The price was $15 million, roughly 4 cents an acre, for territory that would eventually become 13 states. It was a bargain that seemed almost too good to be true, and indeed, it created as many problems as it solved, beginning with the most fundamental question of all. Did the United States Constitution actually allow the federal government to purchase foreign territory? Picture Thomas Jefferson, the great champion of limited government and strict constitutional interpretation, wrestling with this unexpected dilemma in the quiet hours of the presidential mansion. Here was an opportunity that could transform America's future, secure its western borders, and provide room for the agrarian republic of independent farmers that Jefferson envisioned. But nowhere in the Constitution did he find explicit authority for the federal government to buy land from foreign powers. Jefferson was caught between his political philosophy and practical opportunity. As a strict constructionist, he believed the federal government should exercise only those powers explicitly granted by the Constitution. As president, he recognized that this unexpected chance to secure America's future might never come again. Napoleon might change his mind. Britain might seize the territory during the ongoing European wars, or some other complication might eliminate the opportunity entirely. The constitutional crisis was real and immediate. Jefferson privately considered proposing a constitutional amendment to authorize the purchase, but time was shortening and the political process was unpredictable. Meanwhile, Napoleon was fighting wars on multiple fronts and needed cash quickly. Delays could easily lead to the French emperor reconsidering his offer. In the end, Jefferson chose pragmatism over principle, justifying the Louisiana Purchase as an extension of the treaty-making power granted to the president by the Constitution. It was a rationalization that his political opponents would criticize for years, but it was also a decision that doubled the size of the United States overnight and set a precedent for federal land acquisition that would be used repeatedly as the nation expanded westward.
With the Louisiana Purchase signed, sealed, and ratified, the United States found itself in possession of a mystery. The land was vast beyond easy comprehension, largely unmapped, and filled with unknown rivers, mountains, peoples, and possibilities. Jefferson, ever the man of science and systematic thinking, recognized that ownership was meaningless without knowledge. The nation needed to understand what it had bought. And so began one of the most famous expeditions in American history, the Corps of Discovery, led by Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. Their mission was ambitious enough to seem impossible: explore the Louisiana Territory, establish relations with Native American tribes, catalog the flora and fauna, map the rivers and mountains, and most importantly, search for the fabled Northwest Passage that would connect Atlantic and Pacific commerce. Picture the small band of explorers setting out from St. Louis in May 1804, their boats loaded with scientific instruments, trade goods, weapons, and supplies for a journey that would take them through territory no American had ever seen. They carried with them not just the hopes of a president and a nation, but the responsibility of being the first American eyes to witness landscapes that existed only in imagination and rumor. The expedition became a masterpiece of scientific observation and diplomatic engagement. Lewis and Clark documented over 100 new animal species and 178 new plants, creating a biological catalog that expanded American understanding of the continent's natural wealth. They mapped rivers that would become highways for westward expansion, sketched mountains that would challenge future pioneers, and maintained detailed journals that read like a combination of scientific report and adventure novel. But they didn't travel alone through this vast territory. One of the most crucial members of their expedition was Sacagawea, a young Shoshone woman whose presence transformed the nature of their journey. She served not just as a translator and guide, but as a symbol. Her appearance with the expedition, accompanied by her infant son, signaled to the many Native American tribes they encountered that this was not a war party, but a peaceful mission of exploration and trade. Sacagawea's knowledge of the landscape, her diplomatic skills, and her ability to navigate the complex relationships between different tribal nations were essential to the expedition's success. Without her, Lewis and Clark might never have successfully crossed the Rocky Mountains, might never have reached the Pacific Ocean, and might never have returned to tell the story of what they had seen.
While American politicians and settlers celebrated the Louisiana Purchase as a triumph of diplomacy and a gateway to unlimited opportunity, the Native American nations who had lived in the territory for centuries faced a very different reality. Overnight, they found themselves declared subjects of a distant government they had never negotiated with, bound by agreements they had never signed, and subject to laws they had played no role in creating. The land that the United States had purchased from France was not empty wilderness waiting to be developed. It was home to more than 50 sovereign indigenous nations,
each with its own complex governmental systems, trading relationships, territorial boundaries, and cultural traditions. From the Lakota and Dakota peoples of the Northern Plains to the Caddo and Osage nations of the Southern Territories, these communities had been managing the land, conducting diplomacy, and maintaining social order for centuries before any European flag was planted in North American soil. Picture the confusion and growing alarm in Native American communities as word spread that their homelands had somehow been sold by European powers who had never owned them. Treaties that had been negotiated with Spain or France were suddenly void, replaced by relationships with American officials who often knew little about previous agreements and cared less about honoring commitments made by foreign governments. Jefferson's vision for the Louisiana Territory was fundamentally incompatible with continued Native American sovereignty. He imagined a landscape filled with independent farmers working their own land, creating the agricultural foundation for his ideal republic. But this vision required displacing the people who were already there, either through voluntary relocation, forced assimilation, or, if necessary, military removal. The pressure began almost immediately. American settlers, emboldened by government surveys and land sales, began moving into territories where Native Americans maintained villages, hunting grounds, and sacred sites. Conflicts were inevitable as two completely different concepts of land ownership and use collided in practical daily encounters. The federal government's solution was a series of treaties that were often negotiated under duress, poorly translated, and quickly violated when circumstances changed. Native American leaders found themselves forced to choose between impossible alternatives: resist and face military defeat, or relocate and watch their traditional ways of life disappear in unfamiliar territories. The Louisiana Purchase marked the beginning of a new phase in the long tragedy of American expansion, the systematic displacement of indigenous peoples under the banner of manifest destiny, the belief that American control of the continent was not just inevitable, but divinely ordained.
Once the Louisiana Purchase was complete, Congress faced the enormous challenge of organizing and governing a territory so vast that it defied easy administration. The land stretched across what would eventually become all or part of 15 modern states, encompassing everything from subtropical wetlands to Arctic prairies, from fertile river valleys to arid mountain ranges. The process of territorial organization followed patterns established by earlier legislation, particularly the Northwest Ordinance, which provided a framework for transforming wilderness territories into organized political units and eventually into states. But the Louisiana Territory presented complications that earlier expansion had not involved, most significantly the explosive question of slavery. Southern political leaders immediately recognized the potential of the Louisiana Territory for expanding plantation agriculture. The southern portions of the territory were well suited for cotton and sugar cultivation, crops that were considered economically viable only with enslaved labor. Northern politicians, meanwhile, saw an opportunity to create new free states that would shift the balance of political power in Congress and potentially begin the process of gradually eliminating slavery from American society. The first major crisis came with Missouri's application for statehood in 1819. Missouri wanted to enter the Union as a slave state, which would have disrupted the carefully maintained balance between free and slave states in the Senate. The resulting political crisis, resolved by the Missouri Compromise of 1820, established a precedent that would haunt American politics for the next 40 years. Picture the intense congressional debates as representatives and senators struggled to find a formula that would preserve the Union while addressing the fundamentally incompatible views of slavery held by different regions. The Missouri Compromise drew an imaginary line across the Louisiana Territory. Slavery would be permitted south of this line and prohibited north of it, with Missouri admitted as a slave state, and Maine, separated from Massachusetts, admitted as a free state.
to maintain the balance. But the compromise satisfied no one completely and solved nothing permanently. Each new territory that applied for statehood would raise the same explosive questions about slavery, federal power, and the future direction of American society. The Louisiana Purchase had given the United States vast new lands, but it had also intensified the contradictions that would eventually tear the nation apart in civil war. The transformation of the Louisiana Territory proceeded with stunning speed once American settlement began in earnest. Landscapes that had been shaped by thousands of years of Native American stewardship, controlled burning, selective hunting, sustainable agriculture, were rapidly converted to European-style farming, logging, and industrial development. The environmental changes were swift and often irreversible. Great buffalo herds that had numbered in the millions were systematically slaughtered, partly for their hides and meat, but also as a deliberate strategy to deprive Plains Indian peoples of their primary food source. Rivers that had run clear for millennia became muddy with agricultural runoff. Prairies that had supported complex ecosystems of native plants and animals were plowed under and converted to single-crop agriculture. Picture the vast grasslands that once stretched unbroken from the Mississippi to the Rocky Mountains, seas of native grasses that supported not just buffalo, but hundreds of species of birds, small mammals, and insects in intricate ecological relationships that had developed over thousands of years. Within a few decades of American settlement, much of this ecosystem had been replaced by geometric fields of corn, wheat, and cotton. The cultural losses were equally profound. Native American languages, many spoken by only a few hundred people, began disappearing as children were sent to government schools where English was mandatory and traditional languages were forbidden. Spiritual practices tied to specific geographical locations became impossible to maintain as sacred sites were converted to farms, towns, or industrial facilities. Traditional knowledge systems, accumulated understanding about sustainable hunting, fire management, medicinal plants, and ecological relationships were dismissed as primitive superstition and replaced by European agricultural techniques that were often poorly suited to the climate and soil conditions of the American interior. The Lewis and Clark expedition, for all its scientific achievements, had also served as reconnaissance for this broader transformation. Their careful catalogs of natural resources, their maps of river systems, and their reports on the suitability of various regions for agriculture and settlement became guides for the waves of settlers, speculators, and developers who followed in their wake. What had been purchased as empty land was revealed to be a complex living system of people, animals, plants, and spiritual relationships, all of which would be sacrificed for the vision of an expanding American empire. The story doesn't end with maps and borders, dear friends. It continues in the quiet moments when we recognize that every piece of land, every river, every mountain carries with it the memories of all who have called it home. The Louisiana Purchase changed not just the geography of North America, but the very soul of the continent, creating ripples that still move through our world today. And so, as we reach the gentle end of our long journey together through these interconnected stories, from the disciplined gardens of feudal Japan to the strategic brilliance of ancient queens, from the patient observations of early astronomers to the grand territorial ambitions of young nations, we find ourselves back where we began, in the quiet space between waking and sleeping, where history becomes memory and memory becomes dream.
And so, dear friends, our peaceful journey together comes to its gentle close. Thank you for spending these quiet hours with me, traveling through time and across continents, visiting worlds both familiar and strange. If this helped you unwind and find the rest you were seeking,
Remember to subscribe for more soothing stories that carry you gently towards sleep. Please like and share if you'd like to see more content like this. Your support means everything to creators like me who find joy in crafting these peaceful moments. And in the comments below, leave your suggestions for future journeys we might take together. Perhaps you'd like to explore the quiet libraries of ancient Alexandria, or walk through the misty highlands where Celtic legends were born, or discover the gentle wisdom of medieval monasteries where monks copied manuscripts by candlelight. The stories are endless, and the night is patient, and there will always be another evening when we can meet again in this space between day and dreams. Until then, let your breathing slow. Let your thoughts drift like clouds across a peaceful sky. Let sleep come as gently as morning mist settling over quiet valleys. Rest well, sleep peacefully, and know that somewhere in the vast tapestry of history, all these stories continue, woven together by the simple human need to find meaning, beauty, and connection in our brief time beneath the stars. Good night, dear friends. Good night.